Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to this edition of the Gallery of Honor Plus. It's the second edition that we are recording in front of a live audience. In this series of talks, we interview photographers whose work is part of the Gallery of Honor of Dutch photography. My name is Marc Prüst, I'm a visual story editor and your host for this particular conversation. We'll be discussing photography, media culture, and the image that is part of the Gallery of Honor, and we'll look at the so-called 99+1 images. Let me explain that. The Gallery of Honor consists of the 99 most iconic images from Dutch photographic history. And you, the audience, are invited to add the image you feel is lacking, the image you think should be part of the show. With today's guest, we will discuss some of these photographs as well. Today, our show will focus on identity, on how a photograph can be immersive, and how photography can help us to look at others and at ourselves. Our guest was born in Switzerland with a father from Egypt and a mother from the United States. He came to the Netherlands to study photography at the Royal Academy of Arts, the KABK in The Hague. And during those years, he rediscovered his Islamic background and found himself a practicing Muslim. He graduated with his series, The New Dutch Views. And that series got him into a prestigious Kunstmuseum in The Hague, and with features in national and international news media. It's a photograph from this series that is part of the Gallery of Honor. He has images from this series on show in 4 different exhibitions at this point. The Prospect Show of the Mondriaan Fund. His gallery is showing his work at Art Rotterdam. And here in the Photo Museum, we have his work in a group show with the title Imagination. And of course, his work is part of the Gallery of Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for Marwan Bassiouni. Marwan, welcome. These must be really crazy days for you, huh? I mean, all these shows and all these exhibitions. Which one is most valuable for you?
I don't know.
You don't know? Are they all the same? Or?
Well, of course. Like right now, the Eregalerij is, of course, a big honor to be a part of. It opened last year, though, so in this world, like stuff moves forward and stuff. And right now, I just presented new work that I'd been working on for a year, so I was very excited about what we were showing at Art Rotterdam. Yeah. But of course, the Eregalerij, it's not every day that your work is selected, to be kind of in a museum and selected among thousands of other images from more than 100 years. So that's probably the most significant. Right?
The most significant, but to show new work is always really exciting, I imagine. I think that's also something because it's always, you never know how new work's going to get seen, and cool. Let's first look at the image that was indeed selected for the Gallery of Honor. Can you describe it to our listeners? We have it here in front of us.
Yeah. So
what do we see?
So it's a vertical color photograph of an interior space. The window occupies most of the image, and you can see a carpet under the window and a part of a ceiling with some motifs above the window. It's a white. The room is white. There's a white wall, and the carpet is a kind of Bordeaux red. Yeah, and outside of the window you have a view on polders, and the lighting shows that it could be either early in the morning or late during the day, and there's 2 also plug sockets in the room, and that's it. I think I can say that.
Yeah. Okay. And if you describe it, let's say not the visual part, but on its contents, what is this? What do we see in this image?
So what we're actually looking at is the interior of a Dutch mosque with a view on its exterior. A Dutch landscape of polders.
So through the window of the mosque, we look at we can call this a very Dutch landscape, I would.
Mm-hmm. A Dutch countryside.
The Dutch countryside. Yeah. A polder, very flat and very
flat, yeah.
Very green,
and
not much happening.
And the horizon line takes a considerable importance in the image as it crosses nearly the middle of the window.
Right, right. How did you get the idea? Because it's part of a series. I mean, you've been photographing a lot of mosques, and from in each mosque, you've been capturing the view outside, the view of the landscape. How did you get the idea to photograph these scenes?
Actually, I'd been making work for like a few years related to the religion of Islam, but kind of more with a motivation of representing it in a different way. So I kind of, as a Muslim, as someone from an Egyptian background growing up in Switzerland, I was always used to seeing images, either whether in the news or also hearing things that I didn't fully agree with. So I kind of wanted to make a different form of photograph related to this.
You wanted to represent Islam in a different way? Was that the point?
I wanted to make an image related to this topic that could somehow make us maybe think differently, you know. I don't know that if it's possible, but that was kind of my motivation, as well as the motivation of being, you know, like a good photographer, you know. I'd done actually a lot of different projects with different types of subject matters. And one day I had actually a meeting with a curator of Van Sinderen from the Photo Museum of The Hague. And he actually suggested, why don't you photograph mosques? We have a lot in Holland. And I thought, that's actually a good idea, because that's quite a symbol of Islam. And actually, and that's kind of how I thought, I think I'm going to give it a shot. And so I started photographing mosques for a while. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I was there. And there was always something with making an image that you didn't expect of a mosque that I was kind of looking for. I'm actually almost, more than 15 years ago, I'd photographed in a mosque in Switzerland, and I'd photographed vacuum cleaners, phones, things that you would see the image, and there was these things that were familiar to us, and that you wouldn't expect to see in a mosque. So I was looking for this kind of familiarity.
Basically, and then showing that a mosque is just quite an ordinary space in a way. Was that the point of that series?
I don't know. I never really finished the series. It was more a technical exercise on slide film, analog slide, and photographing a space. But it's funny that I automatically would photograph things that you wouldn't expect. Like, I didn't photograph the architecture that much. I photographed light in a way. And so when I photographed the mosque again and I came across the window, something kind of clicked, and it took time for me to really start looking more at the landscape. But eventually that's how the idea came, really by photographing, but also thinking about what people think of when they look at a photo. I was trying to understand how I could include a knowledge of the experience of looking into the making of the photograph. And that was kind of what led to this,
Okay. And what's your process? How do you go about? Because I imagine it's not easy to create these images.
Well, I start by looking for... So I'm interested in photographing, not just... So right now I'm interested in photographing the Western landscape from inside mosques. And I've begun doing this in different countries. And my process has been the same. It's changed a bit, it's developed a bit, but the main thing is the same. So I kind of look for the locations I want to go to, and I look for mosques in those regions in order to try to capture as much as I can of the diversity of a national landscape. So I'm kind of trying to photograph a national landscape, including suburbs, countrysides, urban views.
That's also how you select the mosques, to allow you to have different perspectives on each landscape or in each country?
Well, I'm kind of trying to draw a portrait of a country from inside mosques. I know that it's going to always be an incomplete one, but that's kind of what I find interesting. I see photography kind of like a portal through time to go through time and space. And so my goal with each visit is to try to have the overall picture, give you the feeling that you're traveling through a national landscape from inside mosques, but of course with the real views of these mosques. So the challenge for me is to find mosques that can show a diversity of the landscape. Yeah. But I also look for the diversity of the Muslim communities. So For example, in Holland, the biggest communities are Turkish and Moroccan, of Moroccan origin. So most of the mosques, I try to include, a balance between Turkish and the Moroccan styles of mosques, and you can see which are which by looking at certain details. The one actually in this photograph is a new construction, a purpose-built mosque of a Moroccan, Dutch Moroccan community, and yeah. So, and then technically you were asking about the process. So actually,
not so much photographically, but I mean, you have to get in touch with the mosque. You have to discuss what you're going to do. How does that work? What is their reaction of the people basically running the mosque who have to give you permission? What is their take on your project generally? Is it general or is it?
Well, yeah. In general, they're very easygoing, and I show them what I'm doing. And they're very, they kind of, they usually don't give any problems for the access, and they encourage and they help me with whatever I need. Actually, right now, there's even a group of people who introduce me to other people, and they're even going to allow me to go to Scotland to make all the photos and cover everything that I need. So there's different levels.
They're quite supportive.
Some are very supportive because they're aware that there's a certain, sometimes demonization of Islam, and so they try to help with that, but sometimes they don't actually understand the photo also. Like they're like, where's the mosque, when they see my photo? And that's kind of funny. But no, in general, it's very easy. What takes time is making the photographs.
Yeah. You had quite a big success, with this work. You're now continuing. You also already mentioned it. New Western views. In which countries are you working?
So between last year and this year, I've been to Switzerland, England, and Holland, continuing it. And this year, I plan to go to Scotland, Switzerland again, and next year, Belgium, Italy, Germany, and France. Wow!
So you're really trying to get the whole of Europe. Is that the idea, that you want to have a European view on your subject?
Well, I'm interested in trying to, I think that there's certain common points with different Western European countries, but also America as well, and Canada. I think they're also considered Western in a certain way. And I'd like to visit multiple countries, to see multiple landscapes, to discover also the differences, but also the similarities, and maybe suggest and discover different image and perspective on the Western landscape.
Is the reaction from different audiences or different countries, is it different? Or how do people react from different countries to this work?
Oh, I can't speak, for how people react, but
you've had reactions. People react to your work. Right?
Yes, but I've shown most of the work a lot in Holland, in the Netherlands, and I've had a few shows internationally, but I haven't had as much contact with people. But I think that there's been a lot of support in the Netherlands to show the work. It was very immediate, but it hasn't been as fast in the UK or in Switzerland. But in the UK, there's been a lot of interest as well. Switzerland a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know if there's a connection between the interest and how audiences would react. It's an interesting question if whether curators try to do something for their audience, or how do they view representation and Islamic work actually in their museum? Because, in Switzerland I have had some censorship, and I did have one show, though, a group show, and some other small shows, but a lot of them actually were not initiated by photography institutions, but by foundations that were interested in coexistence or social harmony. So that's one thing I noticed.
Yeah, it's not so much about the photograph, but more about what it says. How intentional are you with your work? Do you have a particular something that you want to achieve with the audience?
There's two things. I think that first I try, although I'm involved in my topic because I'm myself a practicing Muslim, and I have a certain affection for what I photograph.
For the is your affection related to the mosque or also to the landscape?
No, to the Muslim religion. You know, because in a way it is connected to the Muslim religion. And therefore mosques. Yeah, I like going to the mosque and praying with people in congregation and so forth. But what I meant to say is that there is like, two things. So the first thing is that my intention, though, although I'm close to the subject matter, my first intention is the intention of a photographer. And my intention as a photographer is to create an image that can offer a sense of balance and harmony, and that can make you forget that you're looking at a photograph, actually.
Right.
And I usually intend the image to be on the wall in a certain space, and to kind of, as I say, teleport you in a way somewhere else. Then, in terms of my subject matter, well, I hope that the images can contribute to expanding our perception or understanding, or initiating at least some kind of maybe a motivation to seek knowledge, maybe in other places, you know. So, yeah.
Let's go back to what you mentioned about the photograph, because for you, the physical object is really important, right? I mean, the way you present the photograph. Can you explain a little bit, because it's about size, it's about an experience, it's about how do you try to achieve that moment that people forget that they're looking at a photograph?
So actually when I started making the work, from the beginning I intended to print it a certain size and to try to suggest an immersion into the space through photography. So for me, a photograph is, in my practice, very much only finished when it's printed and on a wall. You could also project it, but in my case I prefer the wall. And I'm sorry, what was the
what do you do to achieve this immersive experience?
Well,
it's the size, it's the quality of the print. Is there anything else?
I think there's a lot of things involved, such as, well, I printed a lot and I looked at the images a lot, and looking at them on the wall. The size is, of course, important, but it's also about the subject, what is in the image, you know. Not every image works at a certain size. Even within this series now, there's two sizes, two big sizes. One of them's bigger because also the subject is a bit bigger, and I think that it works better, but it also has to do with visual dynamics a lot. When I started making these type of photographs, I started studying much more geometry. I also got inspiration from Zen gardening, abstract arts, and these kinds of things. I also think that...
So then you're basically saying that the aesthetics and let's say the balance of the image help to create the immersiveness of the image.
Well,
it's a way to pull people in.
Yeah.
So you need the beauty to get people's attention? Is that...
That's one thing. I don't know about beauty, but I think that it's kind of like how to create a photograph that will absorb a viewer as much as possible. And I try to figure that out in my work also. So like one of the things that I noticed was that first of all, every medium has, in my opinion, its own like potential to absorb a viewer. And photography, in order for it to absorb a viewer, I think it has to have some plausibility, some kind of authenticity. It needs to feel like that thing wasn't staged, you know, or that thing's kind of in that natural flow of the world. So actually, that kind of inspired me to sort of develop further the aesthetics of the new Dutch views, from compared to the older ones, the newer ones, for example.
How are they different then? What have you adapted?
So the earlier new Dutch views, the lighting inside was meant to be equal to the lighting outside in terms of luminosity. It was a kind of conceptual choice of wanting to have equal lighting for both, in terms of making an image that could be 50% Western, 50% Islamic. But then when I started reflecting about photography as I said, what's the poetic potential to absorb with photography, I felt that what was lost in there was that realism and that depth that you have with natural light. So now the lighting is much more aimed at being realistic, and not like literally like studying how the light right now is coming out of the window, how it's hitting on the carpets, how it's going into a certain gradient, and not touching that, and just trying to be as invisible as possible.
Recreate that in a physical print on the wall.
I don't really have to recreate it because I'm photographing it,
Yeah.
but because of the limitations of technology, I have to remember it. And basically what I'm trying to say is that I think that the poetics of photography, for me, they succeed the most when the photographer is the most invisible. You forget, you don't see the photographer in the image. Or of course he's there, she makes a lot of choices, but it's not like visually that apparent, you know. And so that's one of the things that I think is really important for the absorption. And the other thing I think is a sense of harmony, clarity. Everything in the image needs to be kind of clear. These are basic things I think in composition that painters deal with all the time because they're creating it from scratch. And then, you know, it's stuff like that, I guess.
And would that, because that means, if I translate it into my words, that you're trying to almost create a close representation of reality to allow the viewer to experience that reality.
Well, yes. So I make, I try to capture as many details as possible from the interior space and the exterior outside of the window, and everything's sharp so that your eye kind of, it's kind of like how I see it, like it's kind of like reality, like everything around us is sharp and we look where we want to look, and we make focus where we want to focus. So I kind of wanted to kind of take as much as I could from these places and then present them in an image to kind of invite people to rediscover the place through photography.
Is this work a representation of Islam or of the country outside, or both?
I think that's for, you know, people to say, to judge. I just think that, you know, like, it's really up to people to say. Like, I think it's a representation of a mosque within the Western landscape, and in my opinion, and I think it's pretty much a fact, all these mosques in, for example, New Dutch Views or New British Views or in other countries, these mosques are Dutch, those mosques are British, and those are Swiss, and they're Islamic. They're built here, they use certain materials. A lot of the people who are involved in the community, they're Dutch Muslims or British Muslims. So I think that because we're not so used, it's not totally like, Islam might be somehow integrated, but it's not fully integrated in our hearts and minds as a society as a whole, or accepted. So maybe like some people,
But your work does touch at that thematic, right? I mean, you're offering the Dutch, let's say the non-Islamic Dutch, a view on their own country through the perspective of a group that they don't know about, or that they know about but they don't, intimately know. For me, that would be the value or the strength of the work. Do you agree? Would you agree to that, or is that something that you don't want to achieve?
It's not that I don't agree or that I agree. It's just that it's up to the people to look at the work and to say what they think. I think for that question, like.
No, because in that sense, for me personally, if I just approach it from my point of view, for me the work is truly unique, that it confronts me with a fundamentally different perspective of, let's say, myself. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, in the Gallery of Honor, if I look at all the 98 other images, I mean, they're great photographs, but this is truly one of the few ones that forces me to look at myself. Is that something that you wanted to achieve, or is that really totally up to the audience to decide that?
Oh, well, no, I'm actually very happy that you react that way to the work, so that's great. But of course, the audience always decides, or maybe it's beyond us, kind of what we react to or how we feel when we look at something. But it's true that when I started the work, I wasn't interested in, let's say, I don't believe, one of the things that I was questioning wasn't the subject, but how we viewed the subject. And so the subject matter can often be criticized, but what I wanted kind of to challenge, let's say in the beginning, was how we think about or how we perceive the subject more than the subject itself.
And what would the subject be in this case?
So the theme, actually, in the making of the work, was perception, and not just Islam.
Right.
And I think that, that was very important.
So would the subject matter then be the Dutch landscape and the theme identity or representation?
Well, the subject is the literal thing that's in the image, I think. So the subject is mosques in the West and views from the windows. And the themes, I don't know, I can't say there's a main theme or a sub-theme. Of course, we're dealing with, but I think that's really open interpretation, and people need to see what they feel when they look at it. And you could say that the subject matter is coexistence, or the subject matter is contemporary architecture and landscape. Or I don't think it's important for me to say what the subject matter is or not. Okay.
Because you do feel, we've discussed that before, that you feel that the way, and that was, I think, one of the starting points for this project as well, is that you were kind of frustrated, or you didn't agree with the representation of Islam in Western media. And this was one of the reasons that you started doing this project.
Yeah, I wanted to suggest a different perspective, yeah.
So in that sense, and that's what you're achieving right now through this project.
I hope so, but it's not really the subject. That's what I meant.
Right. Okay. So a new perspective on the Dutch landscape and maybe even the Dutch identity.
Hopefully. Or a new image. It's just an image,
Let's look at a few, we call them the +1 images that were suggested by the audience to add to the Gallery of Honor. There's a few examples here. Let's look at this one.
Can I close this?
Yeah, of course. Let's put the book away.
All right.
What do you see, Marwan, in this photograph?
Okay, I'm looking at a kind of quite a wide angle view of what appears to be like a frozen canal in the Netherlands, because there's I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 windmills in the distance, and I see kind of this. There's a person on the left of the photograph, kind of close to the camera, and then in the rest of the images there are many other people who are ice skating. So it's a frozen canal with people ice skating, and it's a sunny day, and the horizon is taking a bit above the middle of the image, and that's all I can say. Actually, there is a lot of traces of ice on the in the foreground.
Yeah.
From the ice skates.
We know a little bit about the image, the association that the person who suggested this image is moving, and the description is a typical Dutch scenery, ice skating at the windmills of Kinderdijk on February 14, 2021. I mean, this does relate in a way to your work as well. I mean, this photograph is about the Dutch landscape. It's we call it, let's say, an iconic Dutch scenery. But obviously it's very different from the way you would portray the Dutch landscape.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the value in showing this photograph, though? Why do you think the nominator nominated this image for the Gallery of Honor? If you had to take a wild guess.
I have no idea what another person would think. I mean, really, I'm trying to think of if I had sent this image, why would I send it? I think the person clearly has an affection for the Dutch landscape, and that it's not every day that the Dutch landscape is iced up, especially the canal, and it's maybe that's why it kind of captures a certain moment in that year, in time, and it offers a way of seeing the landscape frozen, on some ice on a sunny day, and
but something we all recognize and immediately are able to relate to, perhaps.
It seems like quite a positive type of positive type of atmosphere, and there's a lot of people. I didn't mention that, but there's a lot of people in the background of the image, and they're kind of going into the distance and like smaller, getting smaller and smaller, and so you can imagine all these people out ice skating, and it was frozen, and blue sky, we like the blue sky in Holland a lot, so I guess.
So that's the outside. Here's another image that shows an inside view, almost. So in two photographs, we have what you show in one photograph. Mm-hmm. Can you describe the image?
Okay, so I'm looking at a square black and white photograph of an interior space, which seems to be kind of like some kind of industrial building. The ceiling is quite a prominent place. It's kind of like an architectural photograph in terms of the framing, because we can see the columns and we can see a lot of the pipes in the ceiling that almost take up half the image. There's a bicycle leaning against the wall on the left bottom center. It stands out quite a lot because the wall is behind it, and there's almost nothing else in the room other than 3 fire extinguishers under the window. So we have a view on the windows, actually. It's a bright sun coming through, maybe around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. And outside,
you're really an expert on lighting. I mean, you can the fact that you can see that
it will be
around.
Maybe I'm wrong. This is just my interpretation. Yeah. Outside, we can see bricks of the building, so we can tell that this is maybe a Dutch building. I mean, in Holland we have a lot of bricks, and inside there's a bicycle. So again, maybe it's in Holland. Bicycles are also quite common here.
Yeah, the association that's given by the person sending this image is in love.
In love. Okay.
Yeah, which...
one other important thing about this image is that nothing is in this space. It's almost like an abandoned kind of space, I mean, there's... it looks like it's literally has not been occupied for a while and nothing's happening in here. But that's all. I guess I could leave it there for the description.
Yeah, the description given by the person sending this image is at the neighbors. Don't know what that would imply. So in a way, we have 2 very Dutch images, but from inside and outside.
Yeah, I'd say, this one actually, I have to say that the architecture of the building also kind of reminds me of something maybe that could be local. I mentioned the bricks and the bicycle, but I think the architecture as well. But it doesn't strike me as something as Dutch as the landscape, because, I mean, it's
more hidden,
well,
perhaps.
In the other one, the subject matter, you really feel like it's the landscape. In this one, the subject matter is more an atmosphere, in my opinion, because of the way the light goes through the windows, and there's these squares of light kind of reflected inside the space. And there's also, the lighting is much more prominent in this image, I'd say, and that bicycle, the atmosphere, I'd say, yeah.
But in a way, that all those elements put together would be a pretty good description of your work. Atmosphere, light, space,
I try not
the
to
object outside, the landscape outside. So what these photographers perhaps have kind of created unintentionally, you are very intentional in the way you would approach your subject matter when you photograph the landscape through the window of a mosque.
You tell me. No, when I maybe, but like when I photograph, I do try to capture, the atmosphere of the lighting, and I hope that atmosphere of the lighting can kind of communicate something, maybe emotional, that it can go beyond some material, light thing.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Because if there are no questions, then thank you, Marwan, for this beautiful conversation and for giving us an insight in your artistic practice and for giving, at least me, a unique perspective of my own country. And thank you, the audience, for your listening. We will be back with a new edition next month, where my colleague Baram Sadeghi will host a Gallery of Honor photographer again. You can join us here at the museum or listen to this and previous conversations on your favorite podcast app or via Spotify. Just look for Eregalerij Plus and do as what you always do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.